The emergency beacon screamed across the galaxy like a dying animal. Its signal bounced from relay station to relay station, growing weaker with each jump until it finally reached the massive crystal towers of Nexus Prime. The sound that emerged from the communication array was pure terror, static, mixed with screams and the horrible grinding of metal being torn apart. In the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, thousands of representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their floating chairs, their various forms creating a rainbow of alien life. Some had scales that shimmered like oil on water, others had tentacles that writhed nervously as they listened. The air itself buzzed with translation devices working overtime to convert the beacon's message into hundreds of different languages. Ambassador Iltar of the Zelthani stepped forward onto the speaking platform. His body looked like it was carved from living diamond, each facet catching the chamber's light and throwing it back in brilliant patterns. But today, those normally perfect surfaces were dulled with worry. His hands shook as he activated the holographic projector. Honored council members, his voice rang out clear and desperate. What you were about to see happened 17 rotations ago on Kepler 44b, our mining colony. It's gone. The hologram flickered to life, showing a bustling mining station built into the side of a rocky mountain. Zelthani workers moved between massive excavation machines, their crystalline bodies perfectly suited for the harsh conditions. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. Then the image shifted to show the deep mining tunnels, kilometers below the surface. That's when the nightmare began. Something moved in the darkness, beyond the mining lights. At first it looked like the rock itself was shifting, but then the creatures stepped into view. They were massive, each one the size of a small building, and their bodies seemed to be made of living glass that pulsed with an eerie inner light. Most they moved, that light grew brighter, more hungry. Watch the power readings, Veltar said, his voice barely steady. On the hologram's display panels, energy levels began spiking wildly. Every time the creatures moved closer to the mining equipment, the machine's power cores went haywire. Plasma cutters designed to slice through solid rock simply made the beings stronger. Energy shields that could stop a meteor impact dissolved like soap bubbles when the creatures touched them. The Zelthani miners ran for their lives, but their high-tech equipment turned against them. Hover platforms crashed as their anti-gravity cores were drained. Communication devices went dead. Even their environmental suits began failing as the creatures somehow pulled energy out of the air around them. Council Director Mordash, a being that looked like a walking tree made of silver bark, leaned forward in his floating chair. His branch-like fingers drummed nervously against the armrest. "What exactly are we looking at, Ambassador?" "We don't know," Veltar admitted, and that admission sent a wave of nervous chatter through the assembly. The Zelthani were famous throughout the galaxy for their scientific knowledge. If they didn't understand something, it was truly alien. Our best xenobiologists think they might be silicon-based life forms, but they're unlike anything in our databases. They don't just resist our technology, they feed on it. The hologram continued playing, showing the complete destruction of the mining station. The creatures moved through the facility like they owned it, their bodies absorbing every photon of energy they encountered. Lights went out in their wake. Computers died. Even the emergency power cells simply evaporated when the beings got close. "How many casualties?" asked Representative Clickstar, her insect-like mandibles clicking with anxiety. "The entire colony. 3,000 souls." Veltar's voice broke slightly. "And it's spreading. We've lost contact with 4 more mining operations in the same sector. Every time we send a rescue ship, it goes dark the moment it enters the atmosphere." Space turned into weeks as the council debated. The great hall filled with the sound of 100 different species arguing in their native tongues. The military advisors were the most frustrated of all. General Thokron, whose people had conquered half their star system through superior firepower, paced back and forth like a caged predator. "Our fleets are designed for space combat," he growled, his reptilian features twisted with anger. "Ship to ship. Warfare against civilized opponents who follow the rules of engagement. These ... things. They don't behave like any enemy we've ever faced." "What about orbital bombardment?" suggested Admiral Zafira, her blue skin flickering with bioluminescent patterns that showed her stress. Tried it, Veltar replied, pulling up more holographic data. We glassed 3 entire mountainsides. The creatures simply absorbed the energy from our particle beams and came back stronger than before. It's like trying to fight fire with gasoline, more reports came in each day. Mining colonies, research stations, even military outposts, all going silent when these energy-eating monsters appeared. The Council's finest minds worked around the clock, but every solution they proposed had the same flaw. It required energy, and energy only made the creatures more powerful. By the 3rd week, panic was setting in. Some representatives began talking about evacuation, about writing off entire star systems to contain the threat. Others wanted to seal off the affected areas and hope the creatures would eventually run out of things to consume. That's when Veltar stood up and said the words that shocked the entire assembly into silence. I propose we contact the Deathworlders. The great hall erupted. Voices rose in dozens of languages, all expressing the same sentiment: absolute disbelief. The Deathworlders, humans from the tiny planet Earth, were barely considered a proper civilization by most galactic standards. They still used primitive chemical rockets and fought wars with kinetic weapons. The idea that they could solve a problem that had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy was almost insulting. But as the days passed and more colonies went dark, that desperate suggestion began to look less like madness and more like their only hope. The transport beam faded with a low hum, leaving 6 humans standing on the polished metal platform of Station Kepler-44 to be. The contrast was immediate and jarring. Where everything around them gleamed with smooth curves and pulsing energy conduits, the humans looked like they had stepped out of a museum. Their environmental suits were bulky, patched in places, and covered with equipment that seemed to have been welded on as an afterthought. Dr. Hyjin Park stepped forward first, her boots making solid clanking sounds on the deck plating. She was shorter than most of the Zelthani surrounding them, but there was something in the way she moved that spoke of absolute confidence. Her suit's helmet was scarred from years of working in Earth's most dangerous places, the bottom of ocean trenches, inside active volcanoes, deep in cave systems where one wrong step meant death. Behind her came Captain Dongmin Li, and even the Zelthani could tell he was military. His movements were precise, economical, and his eyes never stopped scanning for threats. The rifle slung across his chest looked like something their ancestors might have used, all metal and moving parts instead of the elegant energy weapons the galaxy had perfected centuries ago. Ambassador Veltar approached them, trying to hide his disappointment when the Council had finally agreed to contact Earth. He'd hoped for something more. ... Impressive. These humans looked like scavengers compared to the sleek perfection of galactic civilization. Welcome to Kepler-44 to be, he said, his crystalline features reflecting the station's lights. We are grateful that you answered our call, but I must ask. ... You brought kinetic weapons? Captain Lee patted his rifle with obvious affection. This old girl has never let me down. Fires a solid metal slug at 3,000 feet per second. No fancy energy cells to fail. No complex targeting systems to malfunction. Point, squeeze, boom. He looked around at the Zelthani energy weapons with obvious skepticism. Sometimes the old ways work best. Dr. Park had already moved away from the group, drawn to a piece of damaged equipment near the platform's edge. The metal looked like it had been partially dissolved. Its surface covered in strange crystalline growths that pulsed with faint light. She knelt beside it, pulling out a scanner that looked crude compared to Zelthani technology, but was built like a tank. Fascinating, she murmured, running the device. Over the corroded surface, the molecular structure has been completely altered. Your energy weapons actually fed them, didn't they? They're not just resistant to plasma. They consume it and use it to grow stronger. Veltar's translator device struggled with some of the human concepts, but the meaning came through clearly enough. How could you possibly know that? Because we've seen this before, Dr. Park replied, standing and brushing dust off her knees. Not exactly this, but similar principles. On Earth, we have organisms that feed on radiation, creatures that thrive in boiling acid, life forms that live off pure sulfur. When you come from a world that's constantly trying to kill you, you learn to recognize the signs. Behind them, the rest of the human team was unpacking their equipment, and the sight made several Zelthani technicians gasp in disbelief. Sergeant Borum Kim pulled out what looked like sticks of clay wrapped in wire, chemical explosives that had been used on Earth for over a century. Corporal Tae-ho Shin assembled a mining drill that ran on hydraulic pressure instead of energy. Cells. Specialist Ji-woo Nam checked over weapons that used gunpowder and metal bullets. "This is your advanced technology?" asked Chief Engineer Nolvek, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "Advanced?" Captain Lee laughed, a sound that seemed foreign in the sterile perfection of the station. "This stuff is ancient by our standards, but it's reliable, it's simple, and most importantly, it doesn't need a power source that your crystal monsters can drain." Dr. Park had moved to another piece of damaged equipment, this one completely encased in the strange crystalline growths. "Look at this pattern," she said, gesturing for Veltar to join her. "The growth isn't random, it's following the energy. Conduits spreading along power lines like a virus following nerve pathways. Yes. These creatures aren't just destroying your technology, they're studying it, learning from it." "That's impossible," Veltar protested. "They're just animals, driven by instinct." "Are they?" Dr. Park asked, her scanner beeping as it detected something new. "On Earth, we used to think the same thing about dolphins, elephants, even octopi. Intelligence doesn't always look the way we expect it to." Captain Lee had finished his equipment check and joined the conversation. "The way I see it, you've been fighting fire with gasoline. Every energy weapon you fire, every power cell you activate. You're basically ringing the dinner bell for these things. But kinetic force?" He slapped his rifle again. "That's something they've never encountered. Pure mechanical energy, no electronics to drain." Sergeant Kim approached, carrying a backpack full of what looked like mining equipment. "Charges are ready. If these things are coming from deep underground, we can seal off their access points the old-fashioned way." "Good thinking, Kim." Captain Lee turned back to Veltar. "We're going to need detailed maps of your mining operations, especially the deepest levels. And we'll need to know exactly when and where these creatures first appeared." "You actually believe you can stop them?" Veltar asked, hope creeping into his voice despite his skepticism. Dr. Park smiled, and there was something almost predatory in the expression. "Ambassador, we come from a world where the weather can kill you. The animals hunt in packs, and even the plants are poisonous. We've survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts. Our entire evolutionary history is one long lesson in adapting to hostile environments. These creatures have never encountered kinetic force," she continued, standing and shouldering her pack. "They've never faced opponents who don't rely on energy-based technology. And most importantly, they've never dealt with humans who are too stubborn to know when to quit." Captain Lee checked his chronometer. "To move fast? Every minute we spend talking is another minute for these things to spread." Kim Shin starts setting up a perimeter around the main shaft. "Nam, get the heavy equipment ready for transport. We're going down there whether these creatures like it or not." The humans began their preparations, moving with an efficiency that impressed even the skeptical Zelthani. Veltar found himself feeling something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. These primitive Deathworlders might look crude compared to galactic civilization, but there was something in their confidence, their absolute refusal to be intimidated, that made him believe they might actually succeed where everyone else had failed. The hunt was about to begin, and for the first time since this nightmare started, the predators were human. The elevator descended into darkness, its ancient cables groaning under the weight of the human team and their equipment. The Zelthani had refused to go any deeper than level 15, claiming their energy-based life support systems became unstable in the presence of the creatures. But the humans pressed on, their primitive mechanical suits functioning perfectly in conditions that would kill most galactic species. "Temperatures rising," reported Sergeant Kim, checking her analog gauges. 120 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing. "Atmospheric pressure is 3 times Earth normal. Just like working in the Mariana Trench," Dr. Park replied calmly, adjusting her suit's cooling system. "Remember, people, we're the apex predators down here. These things have never encountered anything like us." The elevator shuddered to a stop at level 37, nearly 2 miles beneath the planet's surface. When the doors opened, they revealed a world that defied imagination. The mining tunnels stretched away into darkness, but they weren't empty. Crystalline formations covered every surface, pulsing with soft bioluminescent light that created an alien aurora dancing across the walls. Captain Lee stepped out first, his headlamp cutting through the gloom. Unlike the Zelthany energy-based illumination that the creatures seemed to feast on, his simple LED light barely registered on their sensors. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice crackling through the cum system. It's like being inside a living cathedral. The creatures themselves were even more magnificent up close. Each one stood nearly 15 feet tall, their bodies resembling living crystal sculptures that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. They moved with fluid grace through the tunnels, their forms shifting and flowing like water frozen in time. But what struck the humans most was their obvious intelligence. They weren't randomly destroying equipment. They were systematically dismantling it, studying each component before absorbing its energy. "Look at the patterns," Dr. Park said, kneeling beside a partially consumed mining laser. "They've taken it apart piece by piece, learning how each part functions. These aren't mindless predators, they're researchers." Specialist Nam raised his rifle as one of the entities rounded a corner ahead of them. The creature stopped when it saw the humans, its body flaring brighter as it tried to drain energy from their equipment. But the humans' mechanical systems gave it nothing to feed on. For the first time in weeks, one of these beings encountered something it couldn't consume. "Remember, controlled bursts only," Captain Lee ordered. "We're not here to start a war." The creature approached slowly, its crystalline form creating musical tones as it moved. It seemed curious rather than aggressive, tilting its head-like structure as it studied these strange new visitors. When it got within 20 feet, Nam fired a 3-round burst from his rifle. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The bullets struck the creature's surface and actually penetrated, sending cracks spreading across its crystalline body. But instead of collapsing, the being let out a sound like 1,000 wind chimes, singing in harmony. The tone echoed through the tunnels, growing louder and more complex as other creatures took up the call. "It's not a scream," Dr. Park realized, pulling out her geological resonance equipment. "It's speech. They're talking to each other." She quickly calibrated her instruments, devices originally designed to measure seismic activity but adaptable to almost any vibrational phenomenon. The harmonious tones filled the air around them. Her equipment began translating the frequencies into readable patterns. "Incredible," she breathed. "Each creature has its own unique harmonic signature, like a voice. And they're not just communicating, they're singing about us, describing us to the others." Sergeant Kim kept her weapon trained on the creature, while it continued its musical conversation with its unseen companions. "What are they saying?" "I'm still learning their language, but I think they're calling us the Silent Ones. Beings who don't sing with energy, who move through their territory without feeding or being fed upon." The creature that Nam had shot was already healing itself, the cracks in its surface sealing with new crystalline growth. But it made no aggressive moves toward the humans. Instead, it began a new song, simpler and more repetitive than the others. Dr. Park worked frantically with her equipment, trying to decode the meaning. "It's trying to teach us," she said finally. "Like a parent teaching a child to speak. It's repeating basic concepts over and over." Captain Lee lowered his weapon slightly. "Can you respond?" "Maybe." Dr. Park adjusted her resonance generator, creating a simple harmonic tone that matched the creature's pattern. The effect was immediate. Every crystalline being in the tunnel stopped moving and focused their attention on the human team. "They're listening," she whispered. "They want to understand us as much as we want to understand them." Over the next several hours, the human team worked their way deeper into the tunnel system, gradually learning to communicate with the creatures they encountered. Unlike the Zelthany, who saw only obstacles and enemies, the humans adapted their approach based on each new discovery. Corporal Shin used his mining experience to identify safe passage routes, following natural geological formations that the creatures seemed to avoid. Specialist Nem learned to use non-lethal kinetic impacts to get the being's attention without causing serious harm. Sergeant Kim documented their behavioral patterns, noting how they moved in family groups and defended specific territories. But it was Dr. Park who made the breakthrough that changed everything. Deep in the tunnel system, she discovered a vast chamber filled with smaller crystalline formations that pulsed with gentle light. Unlike the adult creatures, these beings were translucent and delicate, clearly juveniles in some stage of development.
Captain,
She called out, her voice filled with awe. You need to see this. We haven't been dealing with an invasion or an attack. We've been walking through their nursery. The adult creatures surrounding the chamber weren't aggressive predators. They were parents protecting their children. Every time the Zelthani had fired energy weapons into the tunnels, they had been feeding the young ones, helping them grow stronger. Every mining operation that breached these deep chambers was seen as a direct threat to their offspring. No wonder they fought so hard, Captain Lee said, lowering his weapon completely. If someone started drilling into a human nursery, we'd react the same way. As the human team watched, one of the adult creatures approached Dr. Park directly. It's a harmonious song now clearly recognizable as a question. She responded with her resonance equipment and gradually, impossibly, a conversation began to develop. By the end of their 12-hour shift, the humans had accomplished something the entire Galactic Council thought impossible. They had not only survived in the creature's territory, but they had begun to establish genuine communication. The beings weren't monsters or mindless predators. They were an intelligent species, trying to protect their young from what they saw as an unprovoked attack as they rode the elevator back to the surface. Dr. Park continued refining her translation protocols while Captain Lee sketched out tactical maps showing safe routes through the creature's territory. They had found a solution that didn't involve destroying anyone, but convincing the Zelthani. To accept it would be another challenge entirely. The real work was just beginning. The rope snapped taut as Captain Lee rappelled down the vertical shaft, his headlamp beam dancing across crystalline walls that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. 50 meters below the main mining level, the temperature had soared to nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and the atmospheric pressure was crushing enough to kill an unprotected human in seconds. The team's mechanical suits held firm, their simple hydraulic systems unaffected by the energy-draining presence of the creatures above. This is insane, Corporal Shin grunted as he followed Lee down the rope, his voice distorted by the dense atmosphere.
Ow, the air's so thick you could
practically swim through it. Hydrogen sulfide levels are off the charts, radiation's spiking, and I'm pretty sure that's methane I'm smelling. Quit complaining, Sergeant Kim called down from above as she secured another anchor point. Remember the deep sea training off? Kamchatka, this is nothing compared to those sulfur vents. At least here we don't have to worry about giant tube worms trying to eat us. Dr. Park descended last, her geological equipment strapped to her back like the world's most expensive backpack. Actually, she said, studying her readings, this environment is remarkably similar to early Earth. High temperature, crushing pressure, toxic atmosphere. It's like looking back 4 billion years too, when life first began on our planet. The shaft opened into a horizontal tunnel system that defied imagination. Unlike the smooth, artificial corridors of the mining station above, these passages were natural formations carved by millions of years of geological activity. But they weren't empty. Crystalline growths covered every surface, creating a network of bioluminescent highways that stretched away into darkness. Captain Lee activated his suit's mechanical winch system, pulling himself along a guide rope he'd secured to the tunnel wall. Movement ahead, he reported, his voice crackling through their hardwired communication system. Multiple contacts, but they're not approaching. They single, quotes, dancing. Through the haze of superheated air, the team could see dozens of the crystalline entities moving in synchronized patterns through the larger caverns. Their bodies flowed like liquid glass, creating complex geometric shapes that seemed to have meaning and purpose.
Ow.
The sound they made was hauntingly beautiful, a harmonic symphony that resonated through the rock itself. It's not random, Dr. Park observed, her scanners working overtime to map the creature's movements. Look at the patterns. They're following specific routes, touching certain formations in sequence. This isn't territorial patrol, it's maintenance. Work. Specialist Nam had taken point, his rifle ready but lowered. Unlike their first encounter, these creatures seemed aware of the human presence, but not threatened by it. They're ignoring us completely, he reported. It's like we don't even register as a threat anymore. Because we're not feeding their young, Dr. Park realized. Every energy weapon the Zelthani fired down here was essentially baby food. We're the first beings they've encountered who don't accidentally nourish their offspring just by existing. The tunnel system opened into a vast, cathedral-like chamber that took their breath away. The ceiling disappeared into darkness overhead, while the floor was covered with formations that looked like crystal trees growing in perfect geometric patterns. But these weren't random mineral deposits. They were clearly artificial, cultivated. With the same care a human might tend a garden. "Sweet Jesus," Captain Lee whispered, his headlamp sweeping across the magnificent vista. "This isn't just a cave system, it's a city." The crystalline entities moved through their urban landscape with obvious intelligence and purpose. Some tended to the smaller formations, adjusting their growth patterns with delicate touches. Others carried what looked like tools made from shaped crystal devices whose function was unclear but clearly sophisticated. In the distance, larger structures rose from the cavern floor buildings or monuments created entirely from living crystal. But it was what Dr. Park spotted in the chamber center that changed everything. Massive formations, each one the size of a small house, pulsed with gentle light that cycled through different colors in slow, rhythmic patterns. They were clearly organic, clearly alive, and clearly something that needed protection. "Captain," she called out, her voice filled with wonder and horror. "Those aren't buildings. They're eggs. Thousands of them." The revelation hit the team like a physical blow. Every mining operation that had breached these deep caverns hadn't just been trespassing. It had been drilling directly into a nursery. Every energy weapon fired in self-defense had been feeding the developing young, accelerating their growth and making them stronger. The adult creatures hadn't been attacking the miners out of aggression. They had been defending their children from what they saw as an invasion. The largest of the entities, a being that stood nearly 20 feet tall and seemed to be composed of pure diamond, approached the human team directly. Unlike the others, this one's movements were deliberate and commanding. Clearly a leader or elder among its people. Dr. Park stepped forward despite Captain Lee's muttered protests. Her harmonic communicator ready. The device had been refined during their previous encounters, and she was now capable of basic conversation with the creatures. She projected a sequence of tones that she hoped conveyed peaceful intentions and a desire to understand the entities. Response was immediate and complex. A musical phrase that seemed to contain layers of meaning. Dr. Park's translation matrix worked frantically to decode it, and gradually the meaning became clear. "It's asking why we don't sing," she reported. "In their understanding, all intelligent life communicates through harmonic resonance. They've been trying to teach us their language since we first arrived, but we've been too quiet to understand." She spent the next hour in conversation with the entity, gradually learning the scope of the tragedy that had unfolded. The mining operations had begun directly above their most sacred nursery chambers. The constant drilling and excavation had damaged the delicate formations where their young developed. When the adult creatures had tried to investigate, the Zelthani had responded with energy weapons that the beings couldn't help but absorb, feeding it directly to their offspring. "They're not trying to hurt anyone," Dr. Park translated as the conversation continued. "They're just trying to relocate their young to safer chambers deeper underground. But every time they move through the mining areas, the Zelthani attack them, and the energy from those attacks makes their children grow faster and need more space." Captain Lee surveyed the vast nursery with tactical precision, his military mind already working on solutions. "This isn't a war," he said finally. "It's a zoning dispute. We just need to establish clear boundaries." He turned to his team, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Kim, start mapping the chamber entrances. I want to know every route in and out of this nursery. Shin, Identify structural weak points where we can create controlled cave-ins to seal off passages we don't want used. Nam, establish observation posts where we can monitor movement without interfering with their activities. You want a wall? Them in, Dr. Park asked, concern evident in her voice. Oh. I want to give them privacy, Lee corrected. We'll create secure corridors they can use to move their young to deeper chambers. We'll seal off the areas where mining needs to continue. Both species get what they need without interfering with each other. As the team began their work, Dr. Park continued her conversation with the entity leader, gradually establishing the framework for what might be the galaxy's first interspecies peace treaty. The solution wasn't going to involve superior firepower or advanced technology. It was going to require the most human trait of all, the ability to see the situation from someone else's perspective and find a compromise that worked for everyone. The war was ending before it had truly begun, and it was ending the way humans always preferred their conflicts to end. With everyone going home alive, the mining station buzzed with activity that would have been impossible just 3 weeks ago. Where once there had been terror and destruction, now there was something the galaxy had never seen before: true interspecies cooperation between beings who couldn't be more different from each other. Captain Lee stood on the observation deck, watching a sight that still amazed him every morning. Below in the main mining chamber, human workers operated their mechanical equipment alongside Zelthani technicians, while in the deeper caverns visible through reinforced viewing ports, the Resonanti moved gracefully through their crystal cities. Tending to their young with the same care human parents showed their children, the solution had turned out to be surprisingly simple once they understood the real problem. The humans had installed a network of kinetic barrier systems, essentially controlled landslides that could be triggered to seal off tunnels when needed. The Resonanti could move freely through their territory without accidentally wandering into mining areas, while the colonists could extract resources without disturbing the nurseries below. It's incredible, Ambassador Veltar said, joining Lee at the viewing window. His crystalline features reflected the lights from both the mining operation and the gentle glow from the Resonanti chambers below. In 300 cycles of galactic civilization, through wars with dozens of species, first contact with hundreds of worlds, no one ever thought to simply listen. Dr. Park's voice drifted up from the lower level, where she was teaching a group of fascinated Zelthani scientists the basics of harmonic communication. Her breakthrough in decoding the Resonanti language had opened up possibilities no one had imagined. The crystal beings weren't just intelligent, they were incredibly sophisticated, with a technology based on controlled resonance that made even Zelthani science look primitive. The thing about humans, Captain Lee replied, watching his team pack up their equipment, is that we come from a world that never gave us the luxury of overwhelming superiority. On Earth, everything is trying to kill you: the weather, the animals, the plants, sometimes even the ground under your feet. You learn real quick that the strongest doesn't always win. Sometimes the smartest wins. Sometimes the most stubborn wins. Sometimes the one who's willing to listen wins. Below them, Sergeant Kim was demonstrating human mining techniques to a group of Zelthani engineers. Their hydraulic equipment looked crude next to their energy-based tools, but it was also completely invisible to the Resonanti's energy-sensing abilities. The crystal beings could work mere meters away from human operations without even noticing they were there. Your species has a saying, Veltar observed. Something about walking softly but carrying a big stick. Lee chuckled. That's one way to put it. But sometimes the big stick isn't a weapon. It's the willingness to think differently when everyone else is stuck in the same old patterns. The news of humanity's success had spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication networks could carry it. The primitive Deathworlders had accomplished something that had stumped the greatest minds in galactic civilization. They had turned a seemingly impossible crisis into a model of peaceful coexistence, and they had done it without firing a single shot in anger. Dr. Park climbed up to the observation deck, her face glowing with excitement. You have to hear this, she said, activating her harmonic communicator. The device filled the air with a complex musical phrase that seemed to contain layers of meaning beyond simple words. What are they saying? Veltar asked. They're offering to teach us their resonance technology, Dr. Park explained. Not just the basics we've learned for communication, but their actual scientific principles. Captain, they're talking about controlled fusion through harmonic manipulation. Crystal-based computing systems that make quantum processors look like pocket calculators. Even theoretical work on faster-than-light travel using resonance fields. Lee whistled softly. All because we were willing to talk instead of shoot first and ask questions later. The implications were staggering. Resonanti had been developing their science for millions of years, working with principles that the rest of the galaxy had never even considered. Their offer to share that knowledge freely was unprecedented in galactic history. Specialist Nam approached the group, his final equipment check complete. "Sir, we've got confirmation from Earth Command. The Council wants to meet with our team. As soon as we return, something about formal recognition and new diplomatic protocols." "About time," Captain Lee said. "Though I suspect this is going to change a lot more than just Earth's status in the galaxy." As if summoned by his words, the harmonic song of the Resonanti began to rise from the caverns below. The sound carried through the station's corridors. A complex melody that the human team had learned to recognize over the past 3 weeks. It was their song of gratitude, a musical expression of thanks that transcended species barriers. Dr. Park closed her eyes and listened to the alien symphony. "They're saying goodbye," she translated. "But not the kind of goodbye that means forever. The kind that means until we meet again as friends." The human team gathered their equipment, each piece now bearing the insignia of Earth's first successful interstellar diplomatic mission. Their primitive tools and weapons were going home. As museum pieces, artifacts of the day humanity proved that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Ambassador Veltar walked with them to the transport pad, still shaking his head in amazement. "My final report to the Council will be brief," he said. "The humans have demonstrated that true strength lies not in superior firepower or advanced technology, but in the wisdom to find solutions where others see only problems. Immediate elevation of Earth to full Council membership with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Captain Lee paused at the transport pad, looking back at the mining station that had become a symbol of something new in the galaxy. "You know what the funny thing is?" he said. "We didn't come here to make history. We just came to do a job, fix a problem, help some people, go home. But I guess sometimes that's how the best history gets made, by people who are too busy working to realize they're changing the world." The transport beam began to energize around them, preparing to carry the human team back to their ship and, eventually, home to Earth. As the familiar tingling sensation began, the harmonic song of the Resonanti rose to a crescendo. A farewell that would echo through the station long after the humans were gone. 3 weeks ago, humanity had been considered a barely civilized species on the far edge of known space. Now they were being invited to join the galactic community as equals, bringing with them a perspective that could revolutionize how different species interacted across the stars. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Perhaps more importantly, humanity would never look at the galaxy the same way either. They had proven that sometimes the greatest weapon was an open mind, and the strongest defense was the willingness to listen. As their ship pulled away from the mining station below continued its work, Zelthani and human miners working side by side while the Resonanti sang their crystal songs in the depths below. It was a new paradigm, a new way of thinking about what was possible, when different worlds found ways to understand each other, and it was just the beginning, the end.